become an idol for me, and it had become a deterrent for me to not address some of these things that we're talking about. And one of them being the dishonesty, the other one is performance. And I had spent my whole life performing my way out of the pain. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Wednesdays with Watson. By now you know that I am your host, Amy Watson, and we have called the inaugural season of the podcast PTSD, Jesus and Me. Definitely seeing the evolution of the podcast and even the evolution of some healing for me, like stuff that I never even anticipated. And so with that being said, the last few podcasts we have had a guest on who is back with us today. Welcome back to the podcast, Crissy.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. I know that this is a little bit outside your wheelhouse, so I do have a question for you because I have fielded this question for about 10 days now, and I'm tired of answering it. So I didn't put you on the spot because I know better than that. So, but one of the questions, since you have been on the podcast for the last, I guess, this is the third week, and some people keep saying to me, and different versions of this question is, how did you get the most shy person on the face of the earth to do this? And so I tried to answer it. My guess is that you will be able to give them a better answer to how this is actually happening right now.
I am shy. I am introverted, but when things matter, I want to be one who speaks up. And I felt strongly that I should lend my voice because I hope and pray that if there are others out there in my position as kind of a caregiver to someone with PTSD or in other situations, that perhaps by speaking up, I could help them. And I hope that people out there, there'll be somebody who says, oh my gosh, me too. I feel that way. And that's helpful for how to be the person living with someone who is struggling with PTSD or any number of things.
For sure. So yeah, so I and that's been my experience, and really some of the people that asked me the question asked it a little bit in tongue in cheek, because we all know that about you, is that when it matters, you will speak up. And so one of the things that I think has surprised both of us is how hard this has been. I have spent the better part of my life pretty much putting myself out there. My story is fairly phenomenal. I say phenomenal, and what I mean by that is phenomenal that I'm still breathing, and that goes back to that Jesus, my church, is the reason why that is still happening. But all that to say, we started doing this, and then you and I started talking about it, and I've been surprised about how hard it's been. Has that surprised you at all, like this part of the experience and talking about some of this?
It has been. I really feel like when we started talking, I thought, well, this isn't so bad. We're just chatting. But the after effect of talking about these hard times, both dredging it up, and dredging is the wrong word, but revisiting those days has been surprisingly hard. But then there is this moment of feeling like, oh my, that's out there for the world. And I just realized that beyond being shy and introverted, I'm a private person. And so this has been hard, and yet I am just as passionate about making sure that this podcast gets out there, because I do think it's important. And so there has been some discomfort, I think, for both of us.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's worth it if it helps someone.
Some of my I agreed with you there, and I think that's the whole reason why I'm doing this. I started this podcast in the middle of right now, today is July of 2020, but whoever is listening to this has started this podcast during the pandemic of 2020, and really, I just needed a creative outlet. I didn't know what it was going to do, but I've always wanted to be a good steward of this pain. I think what has been surprisingly difficult for me, and even where we left off on the last podcast, as you were explaining to me, we were talking about the reality of flashbacks and night terrors and some of the things that were necessary for me to make it, to literally make it and not end up back in the hospital. When I was thinking back at those times, and I ended the last podcast by saying, I want to say to you, I'm sorry, but what I will say is thank you. And I was really shocked at how hard that moment was for me. When I recorded the behind the mic video on our new YouTube channel, I actually got emotional talking about this. It hurt my heart to hear the depths that you were sent when I asked you that question. Were you afraid that I was never going to make it? And so the Lord continues to do healing in this story. And we initially called these podcasts Memory Keepers. I think today we will start a series called A Trenchmate's Perspective. And here's why. I still want to continue to tell some of my story, but I think that we have identified the importance of your voice in this process, as difficult as it has been. As I mentioned, I continue to get emails from people that are sitting in your position, Crissy, where they, or they want, or people like me want to help people like you in their lives understand more. And so because of that, I want to first in this podcast, we're going to drop back into this conversation that you and I had about 6 weeks ago. And then there's going to seem to be a little bit of an awkward break where we're going to continue to talk about that same subject. But let's sneak back into where we left off last time, and then we'll pick up from there. And the first words that I wanted to say were, I'm sorry. But what I am going to say is thank you. And I know that we're not all rainbows and butterflies now. You still live with triggers, and I'm so grateful to the Lord who just found a way to bolster you up, to be there during such a time as this or that, because I would not be here. And I always talk about my desire to be a good steward of the pain, and that's why we're sitting here doing this. We're going to play these few podcasts, and we've got harder stuff to tell.
Yeah.
I want to encourage people out there that don't have a Crissy, though. You're going to find it in a community. But go to meetings. You're going to find a community. There's hope. But I want people listening to this because this is an extraordinary story. This is an extraordinary story. Most people listening to this may be tempted to be discouraged and say, but I don't have a Crissy.
But neither did we. So I didn't have an Amy until the day I showed up for that Bible study and then showed up for Sunday school. I didn't want to go. I'm shy.
Right.
I didn't want to go, but I showed up, and this is what the Lord did. And so today you may look and say, I don't have that in my life.
But you went.
But I went, and you don't know what story the Lord is going to tell. And this is a miracle. This story is a miracle. And God can tell a billion more in a moment because he's able to. And so just because you don't have it today doesn't mean that God isn't going to provide that. When you showed up in Clearwater after leaving John, you didn't have a job, a church, or me, a family, and God showed up.
Boy, did he, right?
Right? Boy,
yeah.
Did he. But for people who are listening and don't currently have those things, my logical brain immediately goes, well, I don't have it. It'll never happen. That's not giving God a chance. Give him a chance. Trust him. Start showing up. Don't be silent. Even if you're the person who has suffered.
Because it's worse than the event.
Yes, or the person who is living with someone who is hurting. You're living with it. Get help too.
Huge.
If you're a caregiver in some ways,
yeah.
if you are walking through this, you need a place to talk to. And a place that's safe to say, this is hard. And I don't know how to deal with this. Or I keep triggering these things.
Mm-hmm.
How can I help? You need a safe place too. And that feels weird to say because really you're the one who's been through something.
Well, it's the whole put your oxygen mask on first.
Yes, I needed a safe place as well. And I had that in Mama Bootsy and in a small group of friends
and in
Dr. Pettit and in my faith. Yeah, but it's imperative for both parties to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and that you have some safe places to share.
And this is really safe places to share. She huge. Yes. So huge. I had spent a lifetime of lying to protect myself. And so you would ask me a simple question like, how much did you spend on that bike that you shouldn't have? And you just really, really wanted to know how much was that bike. You didn't care. You weren't in charge of my bank account. But I would lie to you about that.
Absolutely.
And so how did you stick with me? You forgave me over and over and over and over, and it doesn't matter why I lied, because you've said two things to me over the years, and one of them is you often remind me, give yourself grace for those few good decisions you made to get a Crissy Loughridge in your life.
Absolutely.
And I got up one Wednesday night and went to that Bible study.
Yes.
I got up one day and went to that Cheryl's life group. I accepted the invitation to teach there. And that's not all me. That is that old footprints in the sand. Jesus picked me up and carried me and said, you're going to go here, here, and here. But you also had to forgive me a lot. And so can you speak to, yes, you need a safe place, but I had to have hurt your feelings. And again, you go back to the safe place. But, I would lie to you about the price of a bike.
The lying, of course, for me, being a
true
speaker is the hardest part, and will probably always be the hardest part for me,
because we still struggle with this. I don't bold-faced lie, but if I feel backed in a corner,
absolutely. And that took years for us to realize that if you get backed in a corner, you'll lie. And so then I would frame the question in such a way that you were out of the corner.
Safe. Yes. Well, and I felt safe to tell you the truth.
So I would say something like, man, if I wanted a bike, I'd spend $1 million on it. And then you tell me the truth.
You'd be like, well, it was only 1.4.
Right.
Yeah.
So then it became a win.
Right.
So any way that I could reframe it so that you weren't looking like a bad guy, I knew I'd get the truth out of you. Well, I sure would eat a whole box of cereal instead of having the broccoli that I was supposed to have for dinner.
Right.
And then you'd say, yeah, that's what I did too.
And so we still fight this because we still have an enemy who does not want this message out there. And everybody
He's the father of lies for a reason.
And confusion.
Yeah. And lies, especially, you will find it with PTSD and with domestic violence, especially, because you've learned to survive on lies. And with the childhood you had, you learned to survive on lies. And so to change that pattern overnight it's not possible, barring a miracle. One of the things I want to make sure that I say at this juncture, because you asked a specific question, is why did I stick with it? It is 100%. I saw the person. I saw who you are. Just like any person, if you're looking at them and seeing their sin and not seeing the person, then you're missing out. You've missed the whole point. I saw you. I didn't see your lies. I saw you. I saw my friend. I saw this amazing, amazing, deep faith, wonderful, outgoing person. And so I wanted to dig in and get rid of the lies or any other problems as we were facing different issues. If I stepped on a landmine, I wanted to find out what I had stepped on and why, and how can we get better? How do we find healing so that you could be the best version of you? Because I knew from the day I met you, you had a voice and that you could preach the gospel and that others might gain the Lord because of your story,
but more importantly, because of you. So while you're telling your story on this podcast, the more important thing is you're not a superstar because you've suffered so much. You're a superstar because of who God made you.
Mm.
And don't miss that.
I do miss that.
And I think that a lot of people want to, it is hard to not make a big deal about what you've been through. You were babysat by serial killers.
Right.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard not to make that a headline. But who God made you is a big enough headline.
And it's enough.
It's enough.
Yeah.
It's more than enough.
Yeah, like even if I didn't finish the book, which we all know I'm struggling to do, even if this was the last podcast, it's enough. So yeah, that was, Crissy, the end of that original conversation that you and I had about 6 weeks ago. That, I don't know about you, but we've edited this and listened to this so much. I'm not sure actually what will actually land on people's phones. But so we landed on, if I didn't do anything else with my life, if we didn't do another podcast or I never wrote another word or whatever, that I am enough. And that enough conversation came out of a very organic conversation that was unexpected, quite frankly, about, and you and I have been trying to find a way to explain this, but the unintended, the negative, I wanted to use the word consequence, but
the side effects.
Yeah, so some of the negative, because they really are negative side effects of PTSD, because we went off kind of on this organic conversation about one of the issues that you, as the person walking along closest with me, had to deal with was dishonesty and lying and things of that nature. And so that really sat with both of us, and we thought, boy, we need to spend some more time with this. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and I think re-listening to it 6 weeks later, I wanted to make sure that it was abundantly clear that your lying was not a character issue. It wasn't who you are. It was a sin. And to differentiate, because there are times that you may meet someone or be in a relationship with someone who is toxic, I'm air quoting, or harmful or malicious or all of those things, and you might need to extricate yourself from the situation. This was not that situation. And I just want to make sure that people can understand that we're all sinners. So all of your friends at some point are going to hurt you, probably lie to you. And if you were to toss them out and say, well, you lied to me. I'm done. We're done. You're a liar. You're going to miss out. You're going to miss out on everything that the Lord has for you in that friendship and that relationship. And so it really takes some discernment to know the difference between someone who is sinning versus someone who is a blank, whatever it is.
Sure.
And
like there's a obvious reason, like that kind of thing. Some of these things, and we're going to talk about them. Some of these things are out of character for that person. And I think that we've talked before already about the importance of, you had some people speaking into your life that you trusted and who would have told you to exit right and exit quickly in the event that it was bad for you. But one of the questions I am getting a lot on social media is, how do I help my person understand? And one of the things that I'd like you to say a little bit more, because I can actually visualize this in myself, is you talked about a PTSD patient, particularly somebody with childhood trauma like I had, as a wounded animal. And it's very difficult to do life alongside wounded people in general. But you've talked a little bit about that. How can so when I get these emails, I was like, how can I help my mom or my sister, or my aunt, my friend understand understand me? Talk to me a little bit about that, because that I heard you and I felt that as a PTSD patient when you talked about the wounded animal analogy.
Yeah, I think, the more I think about it, the more, you really do realize that that is a lot of what's going on. The first problem with a wounded animal is you can't communicate. And similarly, I was not communicating with you effectively to say, I am safe, I am here to help. And so a lot of the hard work is figuring out how to communicate and how to let the person know this is a safe place.
And I will say, we're going to start talking about page turners, and we've got a lot of pages to turn in this story that only the Lord can tell. Just like everybody else's story out there, my story is no more phenomenal or important than yours. And I say it all the time, do not compare the stories. But you and I have lots of pages to turn on in this story. And one of them is this idea of doing life with the person, and really what you're signing up for when you do that, because there are behaviors that exhibit themselves, and this dishonesty thing for me was one of them. And when I felt, so we laughed, and I can't remember whether this actual audio actually made it onto the podcast or not at this point, but we were laughing because you're like, well, it only took us 185 years to figure out that if I backed you in a corner, it only took us that long to figure that out. And so that's what I want people listening to this is like, as somebody walking alongside with somebody who has a negative side effect, like feeling like I'm backed in a corner, I need to protect myself, so I'm going to lie about the price of a bike. How can you help that person? Because I can tell you from my standpoint, when I stopped feeling judged by you, whether or not you were judging me or not, but when I stopped feeling judged, when you came alongside, and I can't remember whether you actually said it or I just knew it, like, this isn't who you are, lying about the price of that bike. So what's really going on? Kind of like that old version of what really happened to you. When I stopped feeling judged and you came along, I'm a sinner too, or I lie too, or I do this to that too, then and only then could I go, this is a problem.
Yeah, and I think that is what needs to happen in anyone's situation, is find those key elements. What is the root of the issue? I knew for you, one of them early on I did figure out was you felt like if I said that's a lie, that I was saying you are a liar. Yeah. And it was a character attack. And so I would immediately say, I am not attacking your character. I don't believe this is who you are, but this is not truthful.
Right.
The judging came later, where I could specifically address, hey, I'm not trying to judge you. I would do the same thing, or I would do something similar in your situation too. But let's talk about what the truth is, or however you word it. But the key is to find out what is the deeper thing that is really haunting the person. And this really goes for everybody. In any situation, if somebody is behaving out of sorts, if you've punched someone's buttons, right, stepped on a landmine in general, there's a reason. And if you can figure out what that is, then you both can address it and hopefully move forward.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, so again, we're talking about the unintended side effects of PTSD, and one of them for me it was / is, this desire to protect myself by way of not telling the truth when I didn't feel safe. And so, but I want to continue to talk about some of those and really bleed that into a little bit of what happened after, right? So I had gone back to work and was not doing well. that ministry that is that church and school, about 45 days out, said, hey, you know what, you're not okay, go home. And they honored my contract, and I went home and we continued to really struggle with some of those night terrors and things that we talked about. But I knew that I had to have a job, and in the classroom, as much as I loved it, was not going to be that job for me because of some of the stuff that I was going through. And really, the Lord just extricated me from that situation because, quite frankly, that classroom, those kids, that ministry had become an idol for me. And it had become a deterrent for me to not address some of these things that we're talking about. And one of them being the dishonesty, the other one is performance. And I had spent my whole life performing my way out of the pain. And so one of the things that we can weave into every one of these unintended side effects of PTSD is we can tie it back to I had no ability to understand my value. About 99.9% of the people that just heard that sentence also has no ability to understand their value. And I go back, Crissy, to Stacy and her birthday verse, and when I met her in the psych ward, and the verses said, you are more valuable than many sparrow, and how I just, at that point in my life, and even most days at this point in my life, I didn't get that. But I knew that after I healed a little bit, so I spent that summer pretty much healing, and we had already talked about what would be next. I knew that the classroom wasn't going to be the place for me, and so I had to find a job. We had been talking about starting a business, and before I moved to Clearwater and taught, I had done this exact same business for about 12 years. And so after that summer, we started our business, Watermark Management Group. And do you remember, Crissy, how we named the Watermark? You remember how much fun that was?
Yes. We didn't know what we were going to name it, and we just used a iPod and hit shuffle.
Yeah, so we hit shuffle, and we said the first song that speaks to us, that's what we're going to name the business. We were starting a business where there was all kinds of opportunities for redemption based on how I had spent 12 years of my life and my career and that domestic violence marriage. And so starting this business really was an opportunity to redeem those years. But it also fed one of these unintended consequences / side effects of PTSD, which I was using as an analgesic. I was using it to cope with the pain because even the handfuls of medication still weren't getting it done for me. And so this was an opportunity to perform. But we were riding down the road and this song came on by a group called Watermark. And these are the lyrics that made us name our business Watermark Management Group. Because of who you are and who I am in you, you make all things pure. Because of who you are and who I am in you, you make all things true. You make all things new. And of course, everybody knows how much I love that verse, Joel 2:25, where the Bible says that I will restore the years that the locusts have stolen from you. And so, Crissy, I want to thank you for talking today, and we're going to really make this a springboard off into these unintended side effects of PTSD, because I continue to get messages from loved ones. And so we will pick up in a couple weeks, continuing to talk about some behaviors that some of you may be seeing in the people that you love, and then this trenchmate's perspective. And so, as usual, please follow us on all of our social media. Twitter is Amy Watson Author, Facebook is Amy Watson Author, and Instagram is Author Amy Watson. Thank you for listening, and see you in 2 weeks.